Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
According to a thing called the butterfly effect, a butterfly flaps its wings in Mexico and causes a hurricane in China. It's part of this chaos theory idea. So what would a seismic financial event in China cause in the U.S.? Welcome back to the most widely watched program on Carolina business and public policy. For almost 25 years now, I'm Chris William, and it is a fair question to wonder out loud, cause and effect, if the slowdown in China and other global neighborhoods come to roost in the Palmetto and the Tar Heel states. If and when, what might that look like? We'll wade into these issues and, more important, about our region. And later on, North Carolina State Treasurer joins us again, the Honorable Janet Cowell.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Matt Martin of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, Charlotte Branch, Carl Blackstone from the Columbia Chamber of Commerce, and special guest Janet Cowell, North Carolina State Treasurer. And now, here's Chris Williams.
Hello, welcome to our program. Matt, Carl, good to have you both here. Welcome back.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Matt, we're not going to talk about interest rates because I know your hands are tied. But, I do want to ask you about this uncertainty, the unsettling in the financial markets, in the equity markets, and the fixed income markets, not just domestically but internationally. So how does that come to roost in the Carolinas? What does that look like? Does that cause a slowdown in manufacturing or exports, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I think we're hearing from our business contacts, there's already some slowdown, right? The dollar's a little bit stronger. It's clear that China's growth has been slowing, and we should have expected that would be the case, right? China was always going to slow down. The low-hanging fruit's already been taken care of. So those are going to have their impact through manufacturing. And the thing I would mention is even in the Carolinas, where manufacturing is kind of a larger than average sector, it's still, China's not the majority of what we produce for on the manufacturing side. So it's gonna shave a little bit off of growth, I think, but I don't think it'll by itself do a whole lot of damage. The service sector is really what's driving the regional economy forward.
Yeah, Carl, manufacturing in South Carolina has been strong and built upon, if you will, with the announcements of things like Boeing. Do you have a different take on how this is going to affect?
I think we'll see some impact. I mean, China became our largest export partner 2 years ago, and so we'll see some ripple effect. But for us, it really is consumer-driven growth right now. We're seeing a lot of growth between the low country and the upstate, and significant growth in the Midlands. But our growth is really on consumer-driven stuff. So the manufacturing is still strong. We have 70,000 job openings in South Carolina right now. So there's a lot of opportunities. We'll have to wait and see what that ripple effect will be.
Let's spend a little bit of time. We're talking about financial markets, but let's delve just a little bit into fiscal issues. And I'm going to stay with you, Carl, on this for just a second. So fiscally in South Carolina, what does a strong dollar create a lot of headwind for South Carolina? Not just manufacturers, but South Carolina's output in general. I know some economists in the state have said, this is still a good economy. We feel pretty good about it. But is it we feel pretty good about it except?
I think there's a lot of that. I mean, you look at the businesses that I talk to in the Midlands of South Carolina are optimistic. They feel good about what they're producing, but they also are a little cautious and investing a lot of money back into their facilities. And they've got cash and savings are up. So I think they're waiting and seeing too of what exactly is going to happen. But they feel very optimistic, and we've got some great announcements in South Carolina in the manufacturing realm. Lots of cranes are moving stuff, but they really are. They're a little timid right now in investing like they were pre-2008.
In the Carolinas in general, fiscal sequestration can have a major impact because I mean, I'm going to give you a chance to this, but it's the effect on sequestration and the military installations in the Carolinas will be tens of billions of dollars. Yeah. That's hard to believe. Matt, are we overplaying what sequestration can do to an economy?
No, I think it's important. So you get down to the sub-regions within the Carolinas and some of those local communities, that's going to be a big deal. I think you've seen over the last year or two that those places, if you think of the buildup on the War on Terror, those Fayetteville and some of these other communities sort of had boom times, and it's definitely tailed off, and it shows up in a lot of different measures, including home prices, for example, right? So I think that is a significant deal. I don't think it derails the overall state economy for either South Carolina or North Carolina because of what's happening in the major metropolitan areas. North Carolina, a lot of service-driven stuff in the Triangle and Charlotte. Down in South Carolina, sort of the ongoing momentum from these economic development announcements, that's still playing out and will play out for years.
How does sequestration hit the Palmetto State?
Well, we've got 5 military bases. I mean, it's a huge percentage of jobs in South Carolina, much like North Carolina. We're going to see across the state. We've got the bases are located in the Midlands and the coast, but you have such a large manufacturing base in the upstate that has a lot of military contracts, and so it's going to be across the board impact on South Carolina. We've seen in South Carolina, just in Columbia, we were dealt with a blow. We lost 226 jobs at Fort Jackson through the Army downsizing, but sequestration hits all branches, and so there won't be a part that's not impacted.
Is it any relief that sequestration tends to be temporary? Could be a long temporary, but it could be temporary. Like the Fort Jackson announcement, those are permanent jobs lost. Sequestration can be a month, 6 months, or longer. Probably not. But I mean, is there some relief in that?
Maybe. I think of the broader sort of federal fiscal picture, right? We're sort of, if you look at CBO's forecasts, 15-16 is the
and this is Congressional Budget Office.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Congressional Budget Office. They're projecting that this year or next is the lowest budget deficit. So that sort of trend of growing budget deficits, even in an expansion, starts to pick up again next year based on current growth projections. So with that as a background, there's going to be an ongoing concern about this. So I think the pressure, particularly on defense spending, is going to remain.
So is commercial and policy leadership in South Carolina, are they modeling out what this might look like if things slow down? And I'm not talking about just sequestration, Carl, but just in general, if X happens, then we're prepared to respond with Y.
Yeah, and there's so many unknown quantities out there. I mean, with sticking with the sequestration theme is that with the dysfunction going on in D.C. and it's a wait and see right until the end of October when the defense authorization bill should be passed. Or are they going to have a continuing resolution? So they're also looking for a base realignment committee in 2019, which would codify, if you will, those sequestration numbers. So from military, from the commercial, from state government, we're all looking at those numbers and how they impact us.
Matt, I said I wasn't going to ask you about monetary policy, but I can't help it. I mean, you're so close. I feel like I got to reach out to do this. And people want to know, would you expect, not asking you this directly, but would you expect it would make sense for a Fed rate adjustment sooner rather than later?
So I think what you've heard from FOMC members, and certainly Jeff Lacker, my boss, is that...
And Jeff is president of the
Richmond Fed. that the economy is healthy enough and the right interest rate might be one that's different than we have now. What you've heard from Chair Yellen and others also is that first rate hike, which markets really sort of get a lot of volatility around the timing of that, we would still be in a really accommodative stance, right? So 25 basis points isn't a huge change at the short end of the yield curve. So that's not going to be a game changer by itself. So I'd put it in that perspective of sort of the long trail of where the economy's gone in the last few years and what one small change might mean in that context.
Doesn't, and not to be argumentative, but doesn't it make sense that we've talked about this and looked for this for so long that it potentially could be a non-event anyway now?
In the sense that once it happens, markets then respond and the uncertainty of that particular first movement is behind. And
right.
I think it's common, we've seen this in past episodes where you get a fair amount of volatility around the turning point where policy starts to change, and then it settles down after
right.
that. That's not uncommon.
All right. Well said. I think you danced around that.
It takes practice.
Better than I could. Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to bring our guest on in just a second. Next week on this program, politically, he's been under some pressure, but that's because the Republicans in North Carolina have been doing some things the past couple of years that have been criticized heavily by many folks. John Fenebresk is a Charlotte attorney, but he's the chairman of the UNC System Board of Governors. He joins us next week on this program, John Fenebresk from the UNC Board of Governors. And then in 2 weeks, Dr. Elizabeth Davis is the fairly newly minted president of Furman University, and she will be our guest next week on the program as well. Hope you join us for both of those. If you want to know how fiscally and statistically, operationally, a healthy company looks like, don't talk to the CEO, talk to the CFO. It's hard to deny performance by the numbers. State government is a bit the same way, and in fact, a lot the same way. Best place to get an objective look at revenue versus cost is through the eyes of the state treasurer. What makes this even more true is the Tar Heel State Treasurer was a banker of sorts, was a member of Raleigh City Council, and also a two-time Democrat in the North Carolina Senate. We are joined again by North Carolina State Treasurer, the Honorable Janet Cowell. Your Honor, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you've heard some of the dialogue, but before we get into some of the minutiae, ma'am, what lessons, you were in the General Assembly. You've certainly been working in it and around it for a long time. As we've gone through continuing resolution in North Carolina, what lessons you think are being learned or have been learned?
Well, trying to come into the session with a plan of what the big desires, goals are, and coming in early and trying to control what's put on the table. I think what's been challenging with this session is you've got some really big policy issues still being put on the table, even in the last couple of days. And so therefore it's just, it's like a Turkish bazaar. I mean, you've got people trading things, and it gets more dangerous as you get towards the end with, what might get traded in the heat of the last moments.
Mm-hmm. So the GOP in North Carolina, ma'am, have been called power grabbing, overreaching. Some of that seems to be evident. Some of it maybe not. Do you think there? And you've been in the mix. You know what it's like to try to work through an issue, partisan and nonpartisan. What do you think gets lost in the debate in the public when it comes to making sausages in Raleigh? Is it all about the Republicans trying to control or trying to make up for the last 100 years? What is it?
Well, there's certainly a lot of very ambitious goals and wanting to change things and certainly wanting to do the right things for the state. It does take a lot of expertise and institutional knowledge to pass a good law. I mean, I learned that myself. I was naive as to what it took. And I do think it's incredibly important to get input from the folks impacted. That can be very painful. So I think I can understand the desire to mitigate that and to try and control things, but ultimately you really do need the folks that are going to be impacted to somehow weigh in technically, or just sometimes it's going to be emotional from the people to make a good law. And I think with all the pieces being put on right now, you're missing some of the public participation and input into these laws.
Matt?
I'm going to change tack a little bit. As the economist here, I'm really curious what sort of economic insights you can draw from the work that your office does. And on the retirement side, there's been the broader concern nationally about labor force participation and what's happening maybe with those in that sort of near retirement as part of that. Are you seeing any changes in trends there? So if during the Great Recession people put off retirement, are there trends there that might shed some light on kind of where the labor market is today?
Well, it's been a little more encouraging to see people starting to save a little bit more and participate in retirement systems, because retirement savings is such a huge issue for Americans, as we all know. I will say not as big a swing. You think about in the 1930s, and then what was the savings behavior for that whole generation who went through the Great Depression. I mean, my grandparents included, who just spent the rest of their lives penny pinching. I don't think we've seen that sort of turnaround in the American public, so it's still concerning that there hasn't been more of an emphasis on savings and investment. And then you also see the younger generation, the 20-somethings, really struggling to put away anything with growing school debt and those issues.
So what's the responsibility for the Treasurer's Office, if any, around financial literacy? Because that's kind of what we're talking about here. Yeah, well, certainly there's the direct, almost 1 million people that are in the health plan, the retirement plan, and we have certainly a direct responsibility to try and give good information so that those folks can make good decisions. But I do feel a responsibility for the broader public. I visit school systems a lot, have incorporated financial literacy into the core curriculum in North Carolina, so that the 5-year-olds starting kindergarten start getting the concept of putting money in the piggy bank. It's never too early to start. Carl.
I was, thank you, I'm glad to meet you. I was reading an article recently, an op-ed that you put out about venture capital and using some unclaimed property funds in North Carolina to help fund those venture capital. Can you talk a little bit about that and what's the inspiration behind that? I think it's a great idea.
Sure, and this is an idea that the governor has been pushing, and I am working with him on this. We do have an unclaimed property fund that's about $450 million in North Carolina, so big chunk of money. We have said that investing up to 10% of that, so a very conservative piece of that, into a little higher risk early stage companies could increase the earnings on that investment money. I mean, we have to invest that money for a return. It's not making a whole lot right now. So higher returns, which will feed more money into the endowment that goes for student scholarships. But the other win would be investing those monies in high growth companies in North Carolina. And of course, because we have such strong research universities, looking for the commercial spin-outs of places like UNC and the life science and pharmacy, A&T, NC State. So we think it can be a very good investment for North Carolina, both from an economic growth and jobs, but also for funding student scholarships.
Would you like to see a further allocation, Innovation Fund 3 or 4 or 5, or maybe even dramatically increasing any of them?
Well, of course, we already have so Innovation Fund 1 and 2 through the pension. So those are a little more conservative. Those are about 25% venture, but that's all the way through buyout. So, very advanced ongoing concerns. This multiplier would be all early stage, and that would be $40 million. But on combination, this will be almost $500 million that the Treasurer's Office will have put into investing in early stage companies in North Carolina. And for every dollar we invest, we always go alongside other private equity players. So it's really leveraging a lot more money and getting more exposure to North Carolina for the national private equity world.
And just a quick follow-up, Matt, I promise I'm going to let you get in here again. So are there other states that are models for this, or how does North Carolina stack nationally?
Yeah, there are about 20 states in the country with in-state investment programs. I will say that North Carolina is more of a free market program. There's no you don't get a lower bar, you still have to perform. This is all about, I'm investing on behalf of pensioners. The good news is with North Carolina's economy, we do have very strong companies and growth, and so I can make a good profit in this state investing here.
Yeah, okay.
Bringing in the international aspect, so we talked a little bit about the impact of what's happening with the dollar and international growth. Do you have a view on how China will evolve over time? Does that, and I'm assuming you have some sort of perspective on that informs the portfolio decisions on China going forward.
Well, and of course, as a pension, we have a very long-term view. Yeah. And I mean, you know that I lived and worked in China back 20 years ago, probably 25 years ago now, and certainly think long-term Asia, Asia Pacific, Southeast Asia, where I lived and worked, has a very bright future. But I saw myself as a stock market analyst in Indonesia and Hong Kong. It's a very, there's a lot of volatility that comes with emerging markets, even one, as large and sizable as China. So I think long term we have a very positive perspective on it, but we recognize as a pension, I mean, we've had a lot of volatility, over the past weeks and months, and we know that that's going to continue to happen.
Along that same line, Hire company just invested $70 million in their facility in Camden, South Carolina. Hires is a Chinese company. Are y'all seeing lots of investment from Asia in North Carolina? Do you expect that continued growth from the Asia markets in the Southeast?
I do talk to a lot of international investors, and there is a lot of interest in trying to find some higher return investments in the United States. And particularly, and of course, we've had Lenovo and Smithfield, so I think North Carolina will be, in South Carolina, very attractive markets. It's still difficult for them to connect the dots, and I'm sure you, as an economic developer, there's a lot more interest to invest in the United States than there are deals to be had. So how we can better improve that, that might be something you've got some ideas on. But
one of the most contentious issues in the latest session in North Carolina General Assembly, Madam Treasurer, has been this issue of sales tax redistribution. And just as a matter of quick review, it is basically taking sales tax revenue from urban areas and distributing them toward the more urban, the other way around, urban areas to rural areas. What this highlights is what we've heard for a long time, and that is urban versus rural. Mm-hmm. This is not a new phenomenon, but is it a new level of what has gone on between development in the urban cores and rural countryside?
Well, we know that the two North Carolinas continue to diverge, and that the urban areas like Charlotte and Raleigh, have just been booming back. Especially after the recession, we all had some rough years. But I know there's a lot of cranes and a lot of buildings going up all over, Wake County, and I've seen it here. That's not happening in rural North Carolina. In fact, we will have 90 counties by 2025 that have declining population. 90 out of 100 counties will be in decline. So it's really just very few counties. So I think that has put pressure on the legislature to come up with plans on how are they going to help rural counties. So it's a laudable goal. I don't think sales tax redistribution is the best way to do that. I think investing in infrastructure is something that could really help rural counties immediately. I agree with that. And I think the other is investing in your K through 12 education. I mean, the schoolhouse is at every cross section of every county, and making sure that the children in those counties have access to a good education, I think, is the most immediate and positive impact. And then finally, on the sales tax redistribution, I was talking to the mayor of Burlington. Burlington put a tremendous amount of investment to build retail sales outlet there on the I-40. They put a lot of their own resources into that, and they're paying those resources off to change the rules of the game after communities who have made tremendous investments to attract sales and retail. I know Apex, North Carolina, being another one. Is a huge hardship for folks that have made good decisions and made investments, and now you're going to take a big chunk of that revenue away.
So how is it beyond, and we only got a minute left, but is it beyond just coming up in the North Carolina General Assembly? Does it really go back to the local community to say, all right, we're going to have to be more progressive to figure out how to fix this, because we're only going to get X amount of help from Raleigh?
Yeah, I mean, there's not an easy answer to just, and even if you did just shift sales tax over, how do you then best utilize that revenue? I mean, these are hard things to make a decision. There's no easy answer, but I do think that education and physical infrastructure are the most high return investments we could make.
That'll be the last word. Thank you for your service. Thanks for watching over the state budget. It needs it. It's nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Carl, thanks for being on the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And we're going to be we're going to be watching when the Fed makes that interest rate hike.
As will I.
As I'm sure you will. Thanks, Matt. Good to see you. Thank you for watching our program. If you have questions, comments, carolinabusinessreview.org. Please join the conversation. Until next week, I'm Chris. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.